Hello, friends. You ready for story time? So, there's a thrift store near where I live, and a lot of times they get book donations. And for whatever reason, they decide that some of the books that they receive are not sellable, so they just put them out in this really large um, bookcase out in front of the shop, like under the eaves. And I always scour it every single time I go to this thrift shop. And, like, this is pretty interesting and crazy. But I found both of these book sets. This is a 4 volume set, and this is a 4 volume set. And I found both of them in this free section at different times. And I grabbed them just because I love reference manuals or anything with illustrations. I didn't really even take stock of the name, which is kind of funny. And I didn't realize until probably like 2 years later that they're the same book series, just different times. And this is incredible. This is a first edition 1920s. Like, look at this gold leaf here on the edges with a leather bound. And, like, seriously, this is from 1920, at least according to the date in here, 1923. Right, and then this one is from, I believe, 60s, 67, I think it was. Oh, 78. So, 4th edition versus 1st edition. Now, to make a long story short, the thing that I wanted to read out of this volume is deeply meaningful and important to me. And I want to point out that this 1978 version does not have it. They omitted something really important. This is Carpenter's and Builder's Library #1 by John E. Ball. And as you can see, it goes right from the publishing information to the foreword. There's no nothing in between there, except, and then just the table of contents, and then it jumps right into the content itself. And now the reason this is so interesting to me is because this original first edition has a very significant little thing here from John Ruskin. I'm going to read out loud just because I think it's worth reading out loud. When we build, let us think that we build forever. Let it not be for present delight nor for present use alone. Let it be such work as our descendants will thank us for. And let us think, as we lay stone on stone, that a time is to come when those stones will be held sacred because our hands have touched them, and that men will say, as they look upon the labor and wrought substance of them, see, this our Father did for us. Overlooking the blatant sexism of the age and so forth. It's a very meaningful passage, and something that you could say that's been lost from time, and for a reason, and not just due to simple omission, but because civilization has become more transient and disposable, because that's what's profitable. And but that sentiment is really powerful and meaningful, and it's something that's missing from modern civilization. And so I just wanted to highlight it in this video because I think it's worth hearing and repeating. Another cool thing, the first thing I did when I realized I had 2 identical volumes was I went through the table of contents and I compared the chapters between the 2 volumes to see if anything else had been left out or changed. And they mainly just rearranged stuff. But the one thing that I found really fascinating was that the illustrations changed. They basically took these really nice old illustrations. Let's see if I can find the identical matching page. It was kind of difficult, but yeah, they took the really nice old school engraved illustrations, so you can see just how cool they are, and then they replaced them with a more modern version. This is actually a horrible example. See if I can find one that's a little more interesting. But I mean, the illustrations themselves are kind of like simplified, and I would say in a sense they're kind of dumbed down compared to the originals. However, in a lot of cases they have a little bit more clarity. So that's kind of an interesting concept, and the idea that sophistication and complexity are intertwined, and in order to create more clarity, you have to lose a certain level of sophistication. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. Just looking for a really good example here of a illustration that it was pretty surprising to see how consistent the illustrations were, but kind of mysterious how they were just completely redrawn, and in many cases unnecessarily, it seemed. You can see how simple these are, like the wood grain, the legends, the tools, even the hands, versus the 1920s version, which, I mean, you can tell just by looking at it, like there's so much more detail. Like the wood grain is a lot more fully rendered. And of course, some of the illustrations, of course, did need to be replaced because the tools have evolved between the 20s and the 70s, or almost the 80s. Yeah, just kind of interesting. And the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's like, really, what has been lost, if anything? It's hard to say, but definitely that quote from the beginning, and the idea that when we build, we're not just building for ourselves, we're not just building for the current moment, we're building for eternity. I mean, not really eternity, but we're building for, the lifespan of the materials and for posterity and stuff. And that's how they used to build in the past. I mean, going back farther and farther in time, to the Stone Age, all these monoliths and the pyramids and so forth, the Parthenon, all those things, like the aqueducts that still exist because of that philosophy, versus nowadays what we have is a very temporary society where you're lucky if a building will last more than a single generation. In fact, a lot of times 20, 30, if you're lucky, 40 years for a modern structure. And I think it's really worth discussing more at length sort of the philosophy behind that and the rationale, and like whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, because depending on how you interpret it, it could be a good thing because all the mistakes that you make within that generation basically are erased. It is similar to the ideology behind primitive societies, or so-called primitive societies that build using materials that quickly decay and erode and so forth, so that they have to periodically refresh their architecture. There are pluses and negatives to that kind of lifestyle. Because if, like, just think of the brutalism of the concrete structures that were made in the Soviet Union and stuff, like that. A lot of those, some of them are still there, but they were a horrible idea to begin with, and they continue to persist as a monument of depression and oppression and despair in a lot of ways, just perpetually decaying without ever really collapsing. So yeah, you want to avoid that scenario. So clearly, not only do you want your buildings to last indefinitely, but you want them to be done right the first time in such a way that they continue to bring joy and benefits and help with well-being and health over the course of many centuries, or potentially as long as civilization lasts. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say on this topic, but yeah, take care, my friends.